Now, I'm a lifelong superhero aficionado, and superhero cartoons were my gateway to them, since I really didn't immerse myself in the comics until I was in my mid-20s. But my gateway to the genre was the cartoons that came out first in the 1970s, and that decade gave me quite the smorgasbord. Welcome to my channel, KC. That's me, Carrie Chug, the Sledge Storyteller. I love talking about storytelling. It is an art form to its many mediums and its history. If you like this video, please click like. If you like this channel, please click subscribe. And while you're at it, why don't you click the notification button down there? Thank you. Now, in the 70s, in them came the new restrictions on kids shows, most notably with violence. And what did we get? So, year 1973. I haven't arrived into the world quite yet. My earliest memories of Hanna-Barbera Super Friends were of those that came much later, and I'll get to those later. But after those years of seeing late 70s Super Friends with what were then the core members of the Justice League minus Martian Manhunter, and because of that I knew nothing of him until like the mid-90s. But I got excited when they started airing in the mid-80s after school on local TB20, and it was the cycle of those familiar to me when suddenly the first iteration suddenly started playing in that time slot. Now, the series used the voiceovers that I recognized. Danny Dark as Superman, Olin Soule as Batman, Casey Kasem as Robin, Shannon Farnham as Wonder Woman, and Norman Alden as Aquaman. Yeah, the diner guy on Back to the Future. Now, in the intro to the series, it acknowledges the group as the Justice League, but it wasn't so easy to adjust to because it felt comparatively bland. And in hindsight, I understand why, because this was amid the cartoon crackdown that started in the late 60s by parental activist groups, most notably Action for Children's Television, where there was much lobbying to curb cartoon violence. Now, I may be a little conservative when it comes to violence in media. I mean, I can't remember a single person-to-person scrap throughout its run, which doesn't give Batman much to do outside of Batmobile action and detective work. Almost every two-part episode hinged entirely on morality plots with misguided villains looking for extreme solutions to global problems who would quickly turn over a new leaf at the end. None of them were from the known DC Rogues Gallery, and then there's
Wendy, Marvin, and Wonder Dog.
They would be the kind of role models for whom these kids' parents might want them to hang about with in their headquarters. But, would their vetting process be where they would say yes to Marvin, who seems to think that being a superhero is all about being in all the glory? And then there's Wendy as the more level-headed one. She seems to serve the only purpose of being the counterbalance to Marvin. And Wonder Dog apparently coming off the heels of Scooby-Doo and Astro. But seriously, as I wanted to be able to take these heroes seriously, this certainly puts a damper on the whole verisimilitude of everything. In this first season, where, one-time appearance of the Flash, as well as Plastic Man and Green Arrow, the latter two of which never came on again. Overall, the first season was okay while watching reruns after school. Whenever running through the first season, though, I was always anxiously waiting for it to finish and get to the better ones. Because, yes, after the first season in 1973, it got better after like a 4-year hiatus. I can only suppose that those running the show found their wiggle room in the terms of level of violence they could implement, because they did start showing person-to-person scraps. We still didn't get any recognizable villains, but the villains were much more villainous, with more sinister motives and the occasional kaiju-level monster. And one other standout improvement, a much more authentic theme.
Batman and Robin.
Here, Hanna-Barbera made up a few of their own heroes to add in Apache Chief, Samurai, and Black Vulcan. Many understandably suspect that this is a knockoff of the previously established in the DC Comics universe Black Lightning. Yeah, the character that was featured in that CW series much later. Hanna-Barbera seemed again to feel the pressure to add kid heroes, and they also added the Wonder Twins, in this case, from the planet Exor. It was far more logical and cohesive in their inclusion than did Wendy and Marvin show. And yeah, it's slightly easier to believe that an alien space monkey Gleek might have semi-human intelligence than an earthbound wonder dog. The whole shtick was their ability to morph off a fist bump, and yeah, Zan got the short end of the deal. Jaina got to morph into any animal of her choosing, including obscure creatures from the home planet. Zan only got to morph into water-based things, like an iceberg, tidal wave, and glacier. It got weird when he would morph into things like an ice crowbar, kind of brittle. But usually he would just become water that would end up into a bucket carried by Gleek, who would be carried by Jaina, morphed into an eagle. Also noteworthy was that added effort to make it kid-friendly with PSAs about health and safety. Also some fun stuff segments with code words and magic tricks. But the next season in 1978 added the Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkman from the familiar DC hero roster, but also the Wonder Twins were pulled out. The show finally brought familiar DC villains as part of the Legion of Doom, though Riddler and Scarecrow were the only Batman villains. We'll get to why later, but it had Lex Luthor as the ringleader, as well as Bizarro, Toyman, Solomon Grundy, and Brainiac to round out the Superman villains. Then Flash villains Gorilla Grodd and Captain Cold, Aquaman villain Black Manta, Green Lantern villain Sinestro, Wonder Woman villains Cheetah and Giganta, though Giganta was lined up directly against Apache Chief, same shtick of growing taller. What I enjoyed most from this season was how they dipped into the origins of Superman, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern in one episode. They understandably held off on Batman until the 80s, and that will be covered in the next video in this series. This episode was a bit contrived in its approach to justify coverage and implemented convenient use of time travel, but it was still fun. The Superfans and Legion of Doom would be taken into a world where they competed in an arena-type scenario where the Superfans were trapped in familiar fairy tale worlds. Remember, restrictions force their creativity to go this way. And this also had a cool new theme.
The Super Friends!
And it was the same theme that they used for the next season. They pulled the Legion of Doom out, but there was one episode with Lex Luthor. They also brought back the Wonder Twins. Things got, you might say, fascinatingly weird. In one episode, Superman was rocketed to a medieval-themed planet where he led a band of lightsaber-wielding knights. In another episode, Mixes Pitlick changes Superman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman into characters from The Wizard of Oz. As well, there's one season where they encounter Dr. Frankenstein, who makes his monster with the combination of the powers of Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman. In the case of Batman, his intellect. But since that was the 1979 season, that's where I will end this Super Friends segment. But there's more to come when we talk about the 80s. So in my last video, I covered Filmation's The Adventures of Batman from the late 60s with Owen Soul voicing Batman. And just how licensing works, I just don't bother to make sense of it. Filmation had the licensing to make the New Adventures of Batman in 1977. And since Olin Soule was taken, they found just the man to fill in. That was the 60s live-action Batman himself, Adam West, as well as Burt Ward back as Robin. No Yvonne Craig, not as Batgirl. She was voiced by future She-Ra voice artist Melindy Britt. Now, I do vaguely remember watching this back in the day, ages 3 to 4, and since I was loving the live-action series, I was also loving the cartoon. When I got another chance to watch it again on the Tubi streaming services, I realized how much I had matured since the late 70s. Now, I do like how the characters were designed, and that the quality kind of stops right there. And yes, here's a reason for the limited rosters of Bat villains on the Super Friends. The rest were featured here: the Joker, Penguin, Mr. Freeze, Catwoman, Clayface, and several that were made up for the series. And I mean, the live action series has longevity in the use of its gimmicks. The gimmicks here are just so cheap. But one interesting, not so appealing factor here is the use of Batmite, who had been part of Batman lore during the late 50s into the early 60s when it was laced with sci-fi and fantasy elements. Batmite was a mystical bat groupie who frequently caused trouble for the Caped Crusaders. In this series, he was a groupie, but more of an annoyance than a troublemaker. And there's a considerable consensus, which I am part of, that he served as the template for another character in the Filmation series, same foil, Orko. Now, this may shock some people, but the New Adventures of Batman was part of a lineup of Filmation cartoons, and yet he was not the headliner of it.
The Super 7.
It was called Tarzan and the Super 7, and I'm not going to really allude to Tarzan. He may be vaguely a superhero, but not enough for me to include here. But those outside of Tarzan and Batman were original characters that Filmation made up themselves. First, there's the Space Sentinels, pretty reminiscent of the Green Lantern Corps. 3 young Earthlings are selected from many centuries ago, where they are endowed with eternal youth and superpowers. They become incarnations of Hercules, Mercury, and Astrea. She as an animal morpher, and that's nothing like the Greek goddess of justice, innocence, purity, and precision of that same name. Then there's Manta and Moray.
Manta and Moray, monarchs of the deep.
Perhaps Filmation had not gotten all the Aquaman stories out of their system as they had hoped to get, because there's no watching this without Manta and the Atlantis knockoff Mu reminding you of Arthur Curry, along with human sidekick who had been raised by dolphins, Moray.
Stretch and shrink.
Then Super Stretch and Micro Woman. It's a husband and wife super duo. He's modeled after Mr. Fantastic and Plastic Man. She's modeled after Wasp, except no flying factor. She just shrinks.
The Freedom Force.
Apparently, these Space Sentinels weren't that popular, but Filmation seemed to still believe in Hercules as a good enough character to keep and made him part of this group alongside Merlin, Sinbad, Super Samurai, and Isis, the last of which started in live action in a sister series to the live action Shazam, and around this time, DC included her in the comics universe.
Adventure show starring the longest arm of the law, Plastic Man.
While Hanna-Barbera was having their heyday with Super Friends, Ruby Spears Animation got their own slice out of the DC universe with Plastic Man, hence why he was never seen again in Super Friends after that one cameo. It is played as a comedy, which has his theme to begin with when he was first published in 1941 by Quality Comics under the title Police Comics, with sidekicks in his girlfriend and wife in the second season, Penny, and Hula Hula. The dangers are high stakes while the heroes fight back with nobility laced with light-hearted humor. And in the second season, not only were Plas and Penny married, they added Baby Plas to their mix as their baby boy who gets into all kinds of mischief. And while the lineup of its shows were varied, there was also one other superhero comedy show in an outright spoof.
Up in the sky, it's the world's smallest superhero, Mighty Man, and Yuck, the world's ugliest dog.
Now, Mighty Man is essentially a human Mighty Mouse, with his non-superhero form being a normal-sized human.
Mighty Man. Boo-boo. Hi there.
Yuck is a dog who wears that mini doghouse on his head because his sheer ugliness is literally earth-shaking. Sometimes it compounds the story's conflict, and other times becomes the saving grace.
Flashing through the sky, he's a go-go guy.
Dynamite is a cyborg Scooby-Doo and Blue Falcon, a somewhat Batman-inspired hero, all part of the Hanna-Barbera superhero spoof. All kinds of hijinks, and Warner Brothers obviously felt that they were worth featuring in Scoob. Basic by the numbers, so what you see is what you get.
Captain K!
Now, after 3 decades of superhero cartoons, shouldn't we expect the all-time grand master voiceover actor Mel Blanc to voice the superhero, even if it is a spoof? He would team up with the Teen Angels to fight crime, and they had their own van where he essentially had a top apartment for him in the form of a cave to keep him at home. And I think he'd make Batman jealous if he saw him. Bats has a utility belt, but KV pulls whatever he needs out of that big body hair.
Hong Kong Phooey, quicker than the human eye.
Scatman Crothers, he has that kind of unique voice with gruff charm that made it a treat every time a character emerged with his voice. And that's the basic premise of a low-profile secret identity behind a goofy crime fighter. It's not high art, but I've had enough conversation with fellow Gen Xers to feel certain that the cartoon was good enough to be memorable. So, cartoon depiction of the Globetrotters with basketball-based powers. Now, did I watch it? Yes, when it was put back in a Saturday morning slot in the mid-'80s. I had no idea that it had originated in the 70s. An average quality gimmick.
Battle of the Planets. G-Force. 5 incredible young people with superpowers.
Now, I've seen, I believe, 2 subtitled episodes of the original Gotcha Man, and I enjoyed them, but I'll never lose my nostalgia for Battle of the Planets. I always rooted most for Mark because of his Sonic Boomerang and Sonic Jet. And, you know, when I once again saw the Battle of the Planets episodes, admittedly, things seemed a little heavily edited and over-explained, so I still have the nostalgia, still in that, but yeah, I'll admit, it was flawed.
The new Fantastic Four.
Now, all this time there has been no mention of Marvel, because for the 70s it seems that they were more focused on live action with the Hulk, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Captain America, with limited success, so only the Hulk had multiple seasons. But you got the Fantastic Four, it made a comeback, not a complete one, and the Patty Freeling's The New Fantastic Four. Things were different due to the rights to the Human Torch being pinned down for a solo movie that never materialized. So we got Herbie, meaning humanoid, experimental, robot, B-type, integrated electronics. Stan Lee scripted the episodes but dealt with major restrictions where the thing couldn't punch anyone and no guns, not even laser guns, were allowed to be used. It only lasted 1 season in 1978.
While weaving her web of justice, it's Spider-Woman.
But the Patty Freeling weren't done with Marvel cartoons after the Fantastic Four. In 1979, they produced Spider-Woman. They modified her powers in that she lacked the super strength she has in the comics, though she could still climb walls and glide with web wings, but she shoots venom blasts, also webs. Another power added in the cartoon, clairvoyance, used in much the same fashion as Spider-Man's Spider Sense, but in terms of cartoon quality, par for the course. But okay, if you were asking me which cartoon distorted things for me the most during the 70s, it's The Thing. Now, this 1979 cartoon was my introduction to The Thing, made part of a combined cartoon show called Fred and Barney Meet the Thing, and though there's never a crossover where that might happen, hard to imagine that could effectively happen. Anyway, the whole premise. Skinny Benji Grimm, when duty calls, goes to the ritual.
Ring ring, do your thing!
And as the Thing comedically answers the call as he saves the day and seems to be having a good time in doing it, with a voice that obviously drew inspiration from the much imitated comedic actor Jimmy Durante.
I should have brung an umbrella.
I finally got a look at the Fantastic Four comic book when I was about 9 years old. It was a major mental adjustment to realize that he was a tragic character who felt cursed with his rock exterior with superhuman strength, all at the cost of his humanity. But yeah, no surprise that dedicated Fantastic Four fans do not fondly look back on this cartoon. Overall, the 70s took what worked in the 60s and experimented more with a lot of fresh, new ideas, some that went nowhere. It went under considerable restrictions and did all right considering. The spoofs were hit or miss. For me, it works on the nostalgia level, but there was a lot of necessary growth ahead when it came to developing true quality superhero cartoons. But that's my insight on superhero cartoons of the 1970s. Agree, disagree, something I left out? Please let me know in the comment section. The link to order the Sledge comic miniseries is in the link below in both digital and paper format. Give it a look. And wouldn't you know it, should there be a Sledge number 4? And yes, that's in the works. So far, I've gotten 5 pages drawn by my artist, Tiago Pereira dos Santos. And in time, I believe somewhere maybe mid-May, I'll be starting a Kickstarter for it. So I'll let you know when that happens. Please pay attention for that. But as I always say, let's all look for civility amid all the bad news out there about social and political strife. Let's not hate. Let's find friends wherever we may go. Everyone be safe, and God bless.